Welcome back to another edition of the Talking National League podcast, episode 26 it is. And I'm pleased to be joined by Ollie Bayliss from a National League journalist. Ollie, it's a pleasure to bring you on once again to have a bit of an update on the National League because a lot has happened recently. Firstly, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Hope everyone had a good Christmas. Hope you had a good Christmas. I'm all good, thank you. How are you, Luke?
Yeah, not too bad at all. Hoping for a better result from Halifax this weekend. But I think to get stuck into it then, I think we'll start with streaming because that's been quite a big conversation at the moment. On the 10th of December, it was announced as a trial period. Would you say it was a successful trial period?
Yeah, you know what? From what I've heard of fans and their experience of it, these things are always got teething issues and are never easy. I think by and large, people that have dipped in or have watched streams or have paid for the day passes, I think generally they've got what they expected. You know, you're watching football at that level in that way. It's the same with iFollow through the EFL. You know, you're not watching the World Cup final on BBC or ITV. You know, it's not multiple cameras. It's not professional commentators in most cases. It's not pundits at half time, all that kind of stuff. For the vast majority of cases, it's one camera. It's one fixed camera that pans and zooms, and it's a commentary feed taken from often a volunteer club, something like that. So it's not the experience of watching Sky or Match of the Day or something like that. But in terms of watching a game of football and following a team and their fortunes and seeing enough of the game and enjoying it in that respect, I think by and large people have enjoyed it. You know, normally, I think that there aren't many people that have complained about it from what I've seen, and normally that's a sign that expectations are being met, right? Yeah. Football fans can be quite vocal; they're not happy about something. I don't know about you. I've not seen many fans moaning that the system hasn't worked or they've paid and they haven't been able to watch a game, anything like that. So, yeah, I think by and large, it's started fairly well for National League.
I think it's always been a talk for a long time, hasn't it? Introducing streaming to the National League, and then Ryan Reynolds gets involved because obviously of the American audience that Wrexham are attracting now, and suddenly we've seen the National League take notice. Do you believe, and this isn't from myself, but it's a question that's been asked by supporters, that the National League sort of bowed down to Wrexham in the first place and thought, well, it's Wrexham, it's Ryan Reynolds, we'll go ahead with it?
Yeah, I don't think it's entirely Wrexham or Ryan Reynolds, but certainly some of the bigger clubs shouting about it has made a difference, right? I think if you've got, if Cheshunt's had kicked off about it in the National League South, I don't think we've had the same impact. I think the league clearly are more likely to do listen to the voices of the bigger clubs, and to an extent they've got the bigger audiences, right? So they've got the bigger fan bases, and if clubs with overseas fans, with fans that are not able to get to every home and away game, are calling for something, then maybe it's right that they listen to that. I think COVID also has clearly had a big factor in this. Clubs were, during the pandemic, some were streaming games and they were able to do it because we did away with that 3 p.m. blackout rule during the pandemic, where clubs couldn't stream games at 3 o'clock on a Saturday. During the pandemic, they were able to do that. So lots of clubs set up their own streaming platforms to let fans watch games during the pandemic, and I think in some cases the audience figures for that were pretty decent. Clubs were able to make a bit of money. They were able to take it, capitalise on that situation, and able to continue ticking over and making some revenue from fans who otherwise couldn't be at games. So I think because of that, we've then gone into these seasons now where fans are allowed back and weren't allowed to stream. I think a lot of clubs quite rightly say, well, hang on a minute, we've shown it can work, we've shown that there's an audience for it, why can't we carry on doing this? I think what's interesting is that the league have decided to do it themselves, to take on that approach themselves and set up this centralised platform and not consult with clubs at all by the sounds of it. It sounds like it's been announced and clubs very much hearing about it at the same time we all were. It's not like they've offered clubs a vote on it. It's not like they've been in discussions with clubs about how it will work. It's very much something that the league have come up with and said, you have to get on board with this. In the EFL, some clubs use the iFollow mechanism and that platform. Others opt out of it. There's a bit more freedom for clubs in the Football League, I gather, in the National League. This has been largely imposed on clubs, as has the way the money's going to be divvied up. Having said that, actually clubs haven't been vocally against it in most cases. You know, if you remember during the pandemic, almost every decision the National League would make, you'd have half a dozen clubs kicking off about it, putting up statements, everything else. Actually, there hasn't been much of that. So that probably says to me that a lot of clubs are relatively happy to go along with what's been proposed there.
Yeah, I want to just ask, in the first place, were you for or against the streaming service?
I think broadly for. I think anything that allows fans to watch games and follow a team, I think is probably a good thing, right? So, you know, if you're a supporter of a National League side and, you know, if you're following Maidstone and you want to watch them home and away, but on a Tuesday night, for lots of people, it's just not practical to go to an away game. You've got a 7:45 kickoff. If you're working in a 9 to 5 in a local area where a football club's based, there's no way you're getting away to Gateshead, are you? So it allows fans to see more of their team. I think broadly that's a good thing. I think we have to be careful that we're not taking away from the live audiences and that fans are not being put off going through the turnstile and going to games live in person. But I think all evidence suggests that's not going to happen. I think if you're given the choice of going to a game at 3 o'clock, you know, watching your home team and supporting them, or sitting at home and watching a stream on a laptop, you're always going to, for almost the same money, let's be honest, £9.50 to watch a game on a stream, you're going to go to a game, aren't you? You're going to go to a stadium. So I don't think it's going to have a particularly negative impact on fans going to games. So I think broadly it's allowing fans to watch games they wouldn't otherwise. And if you support a Premier League team, you can watch most of those games live on the TV, or at least a lot of them on the TV if you subscribe to Sky and Amazon and all the rest of it. So why not be able to do that with the National League? Why not be able to follow your team home and away and see more of your team if it's a possibility? So yeah, broadly, I think I'm in favour of it.
Well, you mentioned that it's £9.50 a game, and obviously in the National League especially, prices are quite high. For example, Wrexham, £22 per game, Halifax, £21 per game, Barnet's £22 per game. Do you often see that potentially you'll get certain fans that, honestly, at the moment of the cost of living crisis, won't be able to, well, would rather pay for the streaming, and we could unfortunately see an impact in the crowd in the upcoming weeks?
I think 100% the costs are expensive for, you know, one-off games. Obviously, some fans have season tickets, and that makes it a little bit more affordable across the season. But yeah, you know, when you're talking £20 plus to go and see a team, absolutely. I think what you can do with the streams is you could have multiple people watching it as well, right? So if rather than 4 or 5 of you all paying £20 plus to go and watch a team, one person pays for the stream and you all sit around the living room and watch it, or a club puts it on in a clubhouse or in a pub, you know, it potentially makes it more affordable. But I think for the majority of fans, that live experience and watching your team in the flesh is still, I think, a preferred way of watching your team. I think because it's one camera, because it's not, you know, it's not this full 360 sort of broadcasting experience that maybe you'd see on Sky or the BBC. I think that people are not, by and large, I might be wrong, might prove wrong, but I think all the research suggests that people would still rather go and watch their team in the flesh and have a cup of tea or a pint at half time and have that fan experience rather than sitting and watching a stream. I think what this allows fans to do is maybe make that choice on a Tuesday night not to make that long journey. I can absolutely buy into that argument that rather than travelling 100 miles on a Tuesday night to watch a game, you might think actually it's easier in January, you know, when it's raining, to just sit at home and watch a stream. Absolutely, I can see that. But clubs can still make a bit of money from these streams. So, you know, I know that the way it's being distributed is not how some people would have picked it, but there is a bit of money for clubs to make from these streams. So, yeah, I don't think it's going to have a hugely negative impact on fans going through the turnstiles. Certainly hope not.
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of talk of how the money is going to be distributed. I don't know if you have any more information on this, but this is what is being reported, and we don't know if it's a reliable source or not, but 25% will be retained by the National League. The other 25% will be distributed to all 72 clubs, and 50% of streaming profit goes to the club. Is that something that you see being reliable?
Yeah, so what I understood was slightly different to those figures, actually. So 60% of it going to the club that the person supports. So if they sign up for a stream, and if they sign up to a year's pass or one match day or whatever they're signing up to, they're asked to supply what team you support. When you do that, 60% of the money goes to that team. So even if you are watching, I don't know, Boreham Wood playing Dorking Wanderers or something, if you say that you support Wrexham, from what I understand, the money goes to Wrexham, because you can jump around and you can hop around games. So you're not actually paying for one individual game, you're actually paying for a day's pass. So you, in theory, could scan across several games. But anyway, 60% of the money goes to the club you support, and 25% of it gets distributed evenly or sort of semi-evenly across all the 72 clubs. So the National League obviously got 24 clubs, but then the two divisions below as well, some of that money is split between those clubs. 70% of it goes to National League clubs. I think 30% goes to Step 2 clubs. And then 15%, I gather, is retained by the league for promotion, for infrastructure, for making that platform and trying to improve that platform. That's how I gather it's being distributed. So I think the big thing is that the money is going to the club you support rather than the home team. So if you say have Halifax Town hosting Wrexham right on a Tuesday night, and normally you'd expect loads and loads and loads of away Wrexham fans to make that journey. It'd be a big payday for Halifax. The risk, I guess, is that slightly less of them make that journey and decide to sit and watch it at home and pay for a stream. Now, if they're a Wrexham fan, Wrexham are getting the money for that stream and not Halifax Town. Whereas if they made the journey and went to that away game, Halifax Town would make the money because they'd be paying £20 plus per ticket to come through turnstiles at Halifax Town, plus beer and a pint and a pie and all the rest of it at half time. So I think that's the slight risk. That's maybe the concern, is that the home teams are probably not going to make, on a one-off occasion, a huge amount of money from the stream, because the majority of people watching the streams are likely to be away fans. But I think the league's argument is, over the course of a season, when you take into account annual passes and all that sort of stuff, that broadly it balances out, and that whilst home teams might not make a huge amount of money from that one match day, they may well then be the beneficiary of it for the next week when their team is away at somebody and their fans are watching those. I think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, sometimes it can often be seen that the bigger clubs are benefiting more from the streaming because obviously they have larger audiences. You may also see, let's say, Dorking are going away to somewhere like Notts County. You could potentially see more Dorking fans tune into the game than obviously what people would be going, because that's always going to happen. So Dorking could potentially be making more of a profit than what they would originally if streaming wasn't in place, potentially. But yeah, I think it's interesting to see. It's something new, isn't it, with the National League? There's a lot of talk about it. People are quite split with opinions on it. For me personally, I feel that there should be blackouts, and I don't know if that's going to be happening. Have you got any information on that?
Yes, well, so the current rule, and it's not a National League rule. It's a UEFA rule, is the 3 p.m. blackout on most Saturdays. There's a few exceptions to that, but most Saturdays across a football season, you cannot sit and watch either on TV. It's the reason that Sky don't show a 3 o'clock game. You cannot watch TV either on TV or you cannot watch football either on TV or on stream at 3 o'clock on a Saturday. Now, there are ways around that a lot of fans have found, that if you use what's called a VPN, or if you're able to convince your internet service provider. I'm probably not explaining this in the best way, because, to be honest, it's technology that I don't totally understand. But if you're watching it abroad, or you can convince your
logistics, basically,
you can convince the streaming platform that you are abroad, you can watch it. And certainly, I don't think anyone's done the research on this, but EFL teams that stream games, certainly there are a number of fans that know how to stream those games from pretending that they're abroad when they're in the UK. I imagine that will also happen in the National League, and I imagine the National League and the EFL and streaming platforms are not that fussed about preventing it, because ultimately they're getting you £9.50 they probably don't see it as a massive problem. So there are blackouts. You can't watch live football in the UK at 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, but fans work out ways around that, and I'm not convinced that the league, the EFL, or anyone's particularly trying to prevent that, because ultimately they make some money from it.
Crowds haven't seemed to have changed, I don't believe, since obviously it's been introduced so far, but that's something that, do you think will happen? Do you think crowds will lower in the future, especially on Tuesday night games with away support?
I hope not. I don't think it'll have a massive impact personally. I think you're right. On the Tuesday night game, occasionally you're going to have fans that decide that they're not going to make that journey, and they're going to, they'd rather pay for the stream than drive a long way and or get public transport or make that journey. But I think the vast majority of fans are keen to go and get that live football experience. And the more you invest in the team, right? So the more you sit and watch your team, the more excited you are about following that team. Actually, the more likely you are probably to go to more games. If you're a casual York City fan that sees a couple of games, if you find yourself on a Tuesday night watching a couple of streams and getting yourself kind of sucked into the narrative of the season and getting to know the players and getting to know the managers, actually, you're probably more likely to want to go to a home game or go and want to see that team in the flesh. Normally, the easier it is to follow a team and to watch that team's fortunes, the more likely you are to then invest more in that club and go and see that club. So hopefully it won't have a negative impact. I think I'd be surprised if it does. I don't think we see that in the Premier League. I don't think we've seen since the introduction of the Premier League and that TV model, crowds dwindling and people staying at home to watch Man United rather than wanting to go to a game. I think if anything, it increases the appeal of clubs and how widespread that appeal is. So yeah, hopefully it's not going to have a negative impact on fans' return spells.
Yeah, that's something else as well with the National League, is it is so competitive. We've seen it's quite a interesting and a league that entertains a lot of people as well. And if it is being allowed to be streamed, you'll be getting casual fans, especially with Wrexham's, American, I wouldn't say takeover, but the amount of Americans and Canadians, Australians that are coming over to watch Wrexham. The league's getting a wider audience, and this could potentially be happening with other clubs. We've seen fans in the past want to support a club from a foreign country and want to, support a team that is quite low down, a sleeping giant perhaps, which they are a lot in the National League, and they find a way to support them from abroad. It'll be widening the audience of the National League and improving its reputation as well, because it is such a good league, the National League, and I think it's not always appreciated by other fans, especially in the football pyramid. I feel that there should be more funding than what there is. It's something we'll come on to as well, the Gate Money documentary. That is something that I do want to come on to, the Gate Money documentary then. I wanted to ask, and it's a question that's been sent in, what was your opinion on how it turned out in the end?
Do you mean the documentary as a whole?
Yeah.
I thought it was a really good watch, to be honest. I mean, my part in it was very brief. I recorded a quick interview with Jasper and the team, but no, I thought it was a good bit of TV. I thought the production value of it was something that you'd easily sit and watch on Netflix or on BBC or whatever. I thought it was really well made. I think they struggled, as I did, to really get answers, right? Yeah. So I think they came up against the same obstacles that I came up against. I think they interviewed all the big players sort of on one side of that argument that were frustrated with the way the money was distributed. I think they did very well to get David Bernstein and Tracy Crouch, people like that. But again, as we've kind of found during this period, the people that were in those boardrooms that made those decisions, now a couple of years ago, haven't really spoken about it. And actually, Mark Ives is coming to the league, and David Pearce, they weren't there at the time for most of that. So whilst they have done interviews about it and Mark Ives has spoken about it, I don't think he honestly knows what was agreed in those November meetings and at the start of the season, before he came into his role in the January. I thought it was a good watch, but a frustrating one, because it kind of relives that really frustrating experience and trying to get answers of what happened at the start of that COVID season.
Yeah, I would quite. I think from my perspective, watching it, a lot of people have got on board of what really is happening because it's quite hard to explain something like that. We've seen that Bournemouth got, benefited a lot from the finances during the pandemic that was given by the higher up. But I think what's interesting is how people have been, made aware of what's actually happened in detail. And it seemed that you got your point across. The only unfortunate thing, which is what I feel the National League could have done a lot better, was to get involved a lot more with it and basically tell the true story of what's happened. Because, like you said, no one's got answers, have they yet?
No, and they clearly don't want to. They clearly don't want to answer those questions and engage with that. Same with the DCMS. They don't want to. It's a clearly a deliberate strategy from both those parties, to be honest, to not be particularly clear or transparent about how and exactly at what point money was promised, whether it be loans and grants, and to not publish all the findings of that independent report from David Bernstein. There's plenty that went on there that and plenty of opportunities to talk about that they don't want to talk about. And whilst they're silent, we can't get to the answers, and it's quite a frustrating situation to be in. Yeah, but I think it's very much a deliberate strategy from both those parties.
What does the current board look like at the moment? Has there been any change recently on who's been added, who's left?
Yeah, so as a result of all of that, really, of everything we saw in the Gate Money documentary, and I agree with you, it made it easy to follow, and it made it clear, what had happened, because it was quite hard to follow a lot of what was going on. So I think it was excellent in that regard. There's been more representation in terms of clubs at step 2 that's been added. There's been a little bit more fan involvement in that board, but in all honesty, it's still quite hard to find out, right? So if you want to find out who's on, any of the FA boards, great. Literally, it's on the website, no problem at all. You look on that National League website and find out who is actually on the board. You can't. Things like that are still quite frustrating when it comes to league. In all honesty, to work out simple things like that, it shouldn't be a secret who is on the National League board, but to an extent it is. You can't find out easily.
You sort of want to accuse people of all the problems that were happening with the National League. You want to ask for answers because, we've got someone who's the admin of the National League account who's been told what to put week in, week out, and there's no clear answer. There's no one to talk to. There's no one for you. If you ever have any issues with streaming, there's very little you can actually get. And I know we haven't seen too many at the moment, but there's very little information you can get on that. And there's a lot of things that aren't clear. It's like how the money's going to be distributed. I don't know why it has to be such a secret, and it's quite unclear. And you've got journalists like yourself who are the ones that are having to explain it. I don't feel that it's fair, and I feel that the National League could be doing a lot more, in my opinion, to tell us what's going on and allow fans to get involved with the National League, because they don't seem to be doing, do they, at the moment?
No, yeah, you're quite right. And it's your, as a fan, it's your £9.50 that you're spending to watch a game. I think fans have a right to know where that money is going to and who they're supporting. Because you know that going through a turnstile on a Saturday or a Tuesday or whatever, broadly, you know where that money's going, right? You know that that's going to that club, or you know that. I think that transparency would be helpful. And the league of Mark Ives, general manager, gave an interview to me, gave one to non-league paper. They did outline it to a point, but actually, seeing it in kind of hard copy on the league's website or when you sign up, and making it easier and more accessible to fans, I think would be really helpful. I think the league, to their credit, I think have got better. I think it was a low threshold. They have got better in the last couple of years at being a little bit more transparent, a little bit more honest, and a little more open. I think there's probably a long way to go in terms of communication still, but it's certainly better than it was. So I think it's worth giving them some credit for that. The transparency and the kind of openness towards some things is better than it was, but they've also not had to deal with quite as many dramas as 2-3 years ago. It has been a little bit easier, and we've been able to focus on football mostly. Right? We're not sitting at home with leagues suspended, worrying about what's going to happen next, and looking at funding to get the season started, things like that. People are more focused on what's happening on the pitch. I think that's probably a good thing for the league and a good thing for fans as well, really, because we don't want to be worrying about money and grants and funding. We want to be worrying about who's getting 3 points on a Saturday.
Yeah, exactly. Would you say then that the National League's a lot more healthy now regarding certain clubs? I know we've still got Scunthorpe going through financial issues, but there's a lot of clubs that it's more against the ownerships and how they operate. For example, Yeovil, Scott Priestnell, he's someone who's obviously on the board, I do believe, unless he's departed recently. York City, there's Henderson, who a lot of people have, had protests against him as well. But would you say overall the National League's in a lot healthier position now?
Yeah, certainly it seems it. We, by and large, and there are some exceptions, there's situations going on. Scunthorpe clearly in a bit of trouble on the pitch, certainly. But by and large, I think clubs generally are run pretty well. They do well. There's not generally a huge amount of sort of speculation in clubs spending silly money that they can't afford to try and get promoted. There are some, but it's certainly nothing like what we see in the Championship, I don't think, in terms of clubs making losses and gambling on promotion. I think, there's some exceptions in clubs like Wrexham where the ownership really put in a bit of money and elsewhere as well. I'm not saying about Wrexham, but it doesn't seem like clubs are run mostly in an unsustainable way. I think in a lot of cases, it's clubs that come down from the EFL that find that they can be in a bit of difficulty. They didn't actually kick a ball to their Macclesfield, but Macclesfield got relegated and dropped into the Football League and went out of business, and that current guys at that point. By and large, I think clubs are doing all right now. I think fans being back helps massively.
Yeah, it certainly does.
I think generally there's a lot of well-run clubs, a lot of big clubs as well. It's an exciting league because you've got a lot of those former Football League clubs that can't find a way back to the Football League because it's so difficult, isn't it, to get promoted and get out of the league. It's some really big clubs at the moment. I think 5, if not 6 clubs, averaging over 5,000 a game, home games at the moment. There's some big support, big clubs at the moment.
Yeah, that brings us on to our next big topic to talk about, and it's quite a big one because it's one that's been around for a very long time now. It feels like for the past couple of years. I've seen you on other podcasts before talking about, you've been on mine before talking about it, but we've never seen any progression. Well, recently we've heard that these rumours are coming back. Have you got any more information on that?
Yeah, so I know the league are keen, so the National League, and they have been for ages, and why wouldn't they, to be honest? The National League are keen to see 3 clubs promoted to League 2, to the Football League, and 3 down. And it's a bit of an anomaly now in English football, isn't it? You look at the Championship, 3 go up. If you look at League 1, 3 go up. League 2, 4 clubs go up. So and then you look at the National League, and it's still 2. It's still the leaders, and then 2 from playoff. It's a bit of an anomaly in English football that's still the case. And clubs always do really well. Every club, I think without exception, that's been promoted from the conference or the National League, from that top level of non-league into the Football League, at least survives a season and doesn't get relegated in League 2. Quite often they go and get promoted again to League 1. So I think that the gap now isn't really there. I think that the top few clubs in the National League most seasons could compete well in League 2. So I think there's a really good argument for it. The National League are in favour of it. I've always felt it's unlikely that the EFL and League 2 would be, because it would have to go to a vote to their member clubs. So clubs would have to vote in the Football League in favour of that 3 up, 3 down approach. And if you're a chairman of a club in League 2, even if you think you might have a good season, are you going to vote for extra relegation spot? Probably not. Clubs are always going to look after themselves first and foremost when it comes to these votes. It's what we saw in the pandemic. So I'd be surprised if enough clubs in the Football League be convinced to vote in favour of it. But there was a story in the Daily Mail a week or so ago that suggested that they were looking seriously at it, and the EFL board were looking at it. I've got no way of knowing if that is true or not, in all honesty, but it would still have to go down to a vote for member clubs, I believe, and I find it hard to believe clubs in League 2 would vote in favour of it, but I have to prove wrong. I think it needs to happen. I think 3 clubs going up, 3 down is definitely a positive thing for English football. And maybe you can make the argument that it it works both ways. So it's easier for clubs to get out of the National League. So if you are a club at risk of relegation from League Two, it makes it easy for you to bounce back again. You're less likely to get stuck like a Notts County have, like, you know, Wrexham, like, you know, a Barnet, like clubs like that have come down and have found it very, very hard then to get back up and get out of the league. Maybe if there's extra promotion spot, it becomes easier.
What we do often see is sides come down, and I know you wouldn't say this with Southend, Oldham and Scunthorpe, but besides them, sides come down in the first season, they seem strong, they're around the playoffs, and suddenly they tail off. We've seen that with Barnet, we've seen that with Yeovil. Why do you think that is?
I think in a lot of cases you've got players on contracts, so you've got players on maybe contracted for that extra year, so you can often keep some of your players in the core of that squad. And if you've been competing reasonably well in League Two, if you can keep a number of those players and add to it, and you know, clubs are forecasting that they're going to get similar attendances and they look to spend similar amounts of money, they compete quite well. And I think often chairmen probably do gamble slightly and look to try and get back out of the division if they can and spend. And then when it becomes apparent it's really difficult and you lose another crop of players at the end of that first season who were with you in the Football League, and you have to recruit again and you have to find good players for non-league football, that can be quite difficult to suddenly be recruiting for the National League and out of a different pool of players. Clubs are quite often not geared up to do that. So I think that seems to be the reason why that sometimes happens. But we also see, don't we, clubs that get relegated and then really struggle as well in that first season in the National League, because I think they lose their better players, and it's a bit of a shock to the system, I think, the National League. But it's a really competitive league. There's a lot of well-drilled, well-organised non-league teams in there that know the level and know what they're about, know what they're doing, and hard to beat. You know, your clubs like Boreham Wood that are, you know, really, really good at setting up and being difficult to beat in the National League, and have done that for years and years and years. You know, we see how well they do in the FA Cup when they come up against a Football League team or a former Football League team that have been relegated. Quite often they do well because they know what that division's about. Yeah,
we're seeing that there's a lot of Football League sides that are making their debuts in non-league, most recently as well. You know, you look at the bottom end of League Two this season, there's Colchester down there. They've never been a non-league club, I don't believe. Rochdale are down there. Gillingham, I don't believe, have ever been a non-league club either. Hartlepool, obviously, they have, but they're another big club, in my opinion, and would be one of the biggest if they did come down to the non-league level. And I think it is about time that they did, you know, add that extra promotion place. But we've been saying that for the past 5 years, and nothing's really changed. There's been no progression, has there, at all? Is there any way, though, of getting around this vote? Because it always does come down to that, because there aren't many Football League sides that are going to vote, you know, in favour, because ultimately, why would you? Why would you want to be more likely to get relegated into non-league? You're not going to, are you?
No, I think it is. I spoke to Mark Ives, the National League general manager, about this a few weeks ago, and he's in favour, and he obviously would be. I said, you know, will it ultimately come down to clubs in the EFL having to vote in favour of it? And he said, yes, that's the only mechanism by which it can happen. So I find it hard to believe that will happen, but it has. Back in the early 90s, well before your time, I'm sure, it used to be you had to get elected into the Football League. So
Altrincham had a problem with that.
And then there was one place, and then that second place was added, and that playoff system, and finally two clubs could go up, and that's in relatively recent memory. So gradually it's heading in that direction. So I think one day it probably will. I find it hard to believe. Maybe if you do it at the end of the season, maybe over the summer, if clubs are being more optimistic about their prospects for the next season, they're thinking, well, we're not at risk of relegation anyway, then maybe. But I think it feels unlikely that clubs in the Football League are going to want to vote for that extra spot, because they really don't want to drop out of the Football League, do they?
No. Do you think that your former non-league sides are the ones that could agree, or do you think there'll be so little interest that it's very unlikely? Like, I'm thinking a Stockport, they're flying in League Two, they're unlikely to come back down, and they probably sympathise with non-league clubs on how hard it is to get promoted.
I guess you probably would have to do it at the end of the season. Probably would be a a matter for an AGM over the summer. So actually, at that point, I guess your membership of the Football League includes two clubs that have just got promoted from the National League and have just become EFL members. I think that would be how it would work. So, say for example, this season it's a Notts County and a Southend or whoever it is. I don't know, but and maybe at that point they go, well, it's been blooming hard to get promoted out of the National League. Yeah, we agree. 3 spots it should be. Maybe there's an argument for that. There are a lot of clubs, obviously, in the Football League with their history in non-league, and that may reflect favourably, but ultimately they're going to look after themselves, aren't they? I think if they manage to get to the Football League, they're not going to want another relegation spot back down into the National League. So.
I've heard that there's a few non-league pages out there that aren't particularly non-league supporters. I might support a non-league club quite far down the pyramid. And they've actually been not in favour for this extra promotion spot because they say that it takes away the entertainment from the league, the competitiveness, because the National League is a very unique league in the world, to be honest. It really is. There's so much quality on show. We've got a club that's, Hollywood's taken over, and you've got other clubs like Notts County, one of the oldest football clubs. I think the oldest football club in English football, despite, I think, Sheffield FC, are the oldest. They were the oldest football league club in the EFL. Chesterfield, another big club. Southend down there. There's so many big clubs in the National League, and I think there's always this feeling that would you really want to see them go and them not return ever again?
But for every club that gets promoted, you're gaining one, aren't you, from the Football League? And yes, I'm sure. BT Sport, who are the rights holders in the National League, do they want to lose a Notts County and swap them for a Rochdale? Maybe not, but by and large, the more clubs you're seeing going down, the more clubs you're seeing going up. The more big names you may well see in the National League. A part of what the appeal of the Championship is you're watching the Championship, and actually every weekend you're looking down a list of former Premier League teams, you're looking down a list of clubs that you think, blimey, they're in the Championship. They were in the Premier League. Those are big clubs, and you think of them in those terms because they've been in the Premier League. So I think the more clubs that go up to the Football League and then come back down to the Football League, the more you look down that list and you go, wow, they used to be in League Two, they used to be in League One. That's a bigger club. So I think even if clubs briefly get that exposure in the Premier League or in the Football League before dropping down again, it means fans can kind of latch onto a bit of a narrative when they're watching them and get excited about watching them. And I think overall it probably is a boost for non-league if we see more league clubs coming down, even if it means we lose some of the bigger clubs going up.
Yeah, there's always the feeling as well with becoming a bit of a yo-yo league, like most leagues tend to be nowadays, and you don't particularly see where the feeling when Stockport got promoted, how much it meant to them. Grimsby get bouncing back was one of the biggest shocks we've seen for a very long time in the playoffs. I think their odds were the least favourites to actually go on to win the playoffs, and they pulled it off. Barrows, your Harrogates wouldn't mean as much to them if they got promoted, and I think that's probably the slight concern from just National League supporters that just love the league as a whole. That will it lose that entertainment effect of it means so much to get out of?
Yeah, I know what you mean. There's like this thing about dropping out of the Football League and getting into the Football League, but it's something we don't really. Maybe the Premier League and the Championship, but we don't. Yeah, we don't view promotion and relegation between League One and League Two in that same way, do we? We don't write stories about a former Premier League club dropping out of the Football League. That's a narrative. Oldham Athletic, when they got relegated from League One into League Two, not such a big story. We get very excited about this kind of imaginary line really between the Football League and the National League. But I think in reality, there's very little between the league. Effectively, it could be a League Three, couldn't it? The fact that the majority of clubs are professional, the fact that the majority of clubs are run pretty similarly to League Two clubs. There isn't much between the standard of the leagues, the standard of clubs. A lot of it is just semantics. It's the way we talk about the clubs and we talk about the leagues. I don't think there is all that much between them anymore. Even the label of non-league really is. Whilst we obviously use it for step one for the National League and down, really there's such a difference between clubs that are in the sixth tier and non-league to the top tier and non-league. It's all labels, it's all words. I think the real meaning of promotion is still you're going up a tier, you're going up a division, you're getting one closer to the top of the tree. And I don't think 3 up, 3 down would change that.
Yeah, I don't think it's come formally, but there's always been this question about extending the EFL to the National League. Would that come down to a vote?
That would, the mechanism for that, I think, would be tricky. I think the National League ultimately comes under the FA, who have jurisdiction over it in a way that they don't have quite the same jurisdiction over the Premier League and the EFL. So it comes down to administration who's running the leagues really, and I suppose as part of that you then have the broadcasting, sponsorship, and all the things that sort of tied in with the EFL or the National League. It wouldn't be something the National League would be in favour of, because they would lose the governance of the best 24 teams in their divisions. Probably not something that the FA would be particularly in favour of either, because again they would lose the governance and the rights to sell off sponsorship and TV money and things like that, with the National League. So I'm not sure it's something that the EFL are particularly in favour of either, because they've got enough of a headache with their 72 clubs. So I'm not how that would actually work and who would get a vote on that. It would be at board level. It'd be discussions, I guess, between the FA and the EFL. But yeah, I don't know what the mechanism would be for that to happen. But I'm not sure there's many in favour of it actually happening. I don't think.
No, and I think that is, I don't know, because I think there's a lot of fans who say, yeah, we would like to extend it. There's others that don't. And I think it's very unlikely, like you've mentioned, it sounds like it's very unlikely that that's ever going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you never say never, because the football, I think you're always going to have leagues and you're always going to have promotions and relegations in English football. Certainly hope so, unless the European Super League comes to pass. But yeah, so things will change and things will evolve, and maybe at some point the sixth tier becomes national as well, and it isn't regional. That's changed in relatively recent memory. There used to be 3 leagues at that level, now there's 2. There's always fluidity and movement in the way that works. Maybe it was even muted during the pandemic that you make a north and a south version of League 2. If I don't know, the cost of petrol massively spirals, or clubs try and become more environmental and don't want to make those long journeys, or the standard decreases, maybe there'll be an argument for regional leagues at that level at some point, or maybe it'll go the other way, and infrastructure and roads and public transport will improve, and actually they'll say, well, why don't we have a national league at step 2 as well? Why don't we combine the north and south? I think these things are always relatively fluid, so you never say never, but I think for the time being, I think the only thing that could change is those promotion spots, maybe. But I'm not totally convinced that the EFL clubs would vote in favour of that, in all honesty.
So the National League is becoming ultimately a full-time league nowadays. There's very little clubs that are still part-time. I believe it's Maidenhead, Wealdstone and Dorking. Do you feel that very, very, very soon those clubs will, I'm not saying die out as in like in terms of going out of business, but will become full-time and become into the full-time module, because they're not in danger. They're not in danger of like going down to the National League North and South at the moment, particularly. But it ultimately feels like, you look at Altrincham and they've gone into the full-time module for the first time in their history. Do you feel that they're going to follow them very, very soon?
Yeah, I think sometimes we get a little bit too tied up with these kind of 2 categorizations of full-time and part-time. Actually, a lot of full-time clubs are on 38-week contracts, I believe. So players are paid, they're full-time, but they're paid for the start of the season to the end of the season, but they're not paid over the summer months. So they're full-time, but they're not actually full-time throughout the whole season. And actually, a lot of part-time clubs are playing twice a week and training twice a week, so actually are maybe for 4, if not 5 days in contact with those players having sessions. So actually, there isn't always a massive difference between the kind of the time commitment and actually how much is being asked of players at full-time or at part-time clubs. I think it's a little bit more blurred than those 2 categories these days. And because of that, you would imagine if you go from part-time to full-time, maybe you're doubling your costs and you're having to pay players twice as much. Actually, in reality, that isn't often the case. The overheads are still pretty similar. The amount of you're spending on kind of utility bills, things like that, the amount you're spending on staff is quite often pretty similar. So actually upping a player's contract from part-time to full-time maybe isn't a case of doubling their salary. If they're already playing twice a week with bonuses and expenses and things like that, and training twice a week, actually moving to 5 days a week rather than 4 maybe isn't a huge leap for clubs. Having said that, there are clearly a few clubs that are still, in that sort of part-time model of not 5 days a week. But it's going to be working for them, isn't it? I don't think there are any of those part-time clubs that are struggling. They're in the relegation zone at the moment. So, maybe actually training a couple of times a week is enough for players at that level.
Yeah, you see, it seems that part-time clubs can attract the best part-time players because there's often players in that module who don't want to go into the full-time module because they've got a really good job, but they also want to play football as well. So you look at Dorking, they can attract the best non-league players. Wheelstone the same, and Maynard as well. I do believe Wheelstone are still part-time as well. We've had a few people that have sent in a few questions, added questions to the ones that they've already said, but someone's put in, what are your top 7 predictions in the National League at the end of the season?
Top 7. So I presume we're going like what 1 to 7 in the league. Like
7 to 1 will go.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
That puts me on the spot, doesn't it? So I think that the top 2, it's hard to see. I think hard to see that changing. Chesterfield not that far behind, are they? But Notts County, Wrexham. I would see Notts County winning the league. I think. I think Longstaff is 21 goals from this season from 23, 24 games so far. He's scoring a ton of goals for Notts County. I think not. If you put them on the spot, Notts County to win the league. Mm-hmm. Probably Wrexham and Chesterfield. This is really boring. I'm kind of going as they are. Really, Wrexham and Chesterfield to take second and third, and then playoffs is an interesting one because there's a whole group of clubs, aren't there, that can kind of snatch those other spots. I think Woking and Barnet maybe have look like they're doing enough to be in there as well. Altrincham on a cracking run of form. Up next to Halifax, aren't they? Altrincham. They're in a great run of form. They're in touch. Dagenham Redbridge are a good position. I think Solihull Moors are doing well. They're a good side. I'll go Woking, Barnet, Solihull Moors, and I'm going to go.
Altrincham. Oh, okay, I'll give it you.
That's an outside. Under Phil Parkinson as that extra. Yeah,
that's an outside shot, to be fair, with Altrincham. Not too many people. I think at the start of the season, a lot of people were predicting Altrincham top half, I believe. And to be fair, they've started very well after a difficult start to the season. So yeah, I wouldn't predict it myself, but I wouldn't be too surprised if Altrincham did manage to sneak into the playoffs. But another question: will Oldham survive this season?
Survive relegation? Yes. But it's a toss of a coin, isn't it, at the moment, the state there. And I think Maidstone are still in a bit of trouble. Maidstone have the worst goal difference in the league. They played loads more, is why they're not in relegation at the moment. Scunthorpe look in real trouble. And then it's a toss of a coin, really, isn't it, at the moment, between your Torquays, your Oldhams, your Maidstones. I think Yeovil probably got enough. Mm-hmm. I think Oldham will. I think Oldham will stay up, but they're not in the best of shape.
Play it safe, because you get a lot of people, a lot of angry Oldham fans on Twitter. If you did predict them to go down, we've had another one that's come in saying, "How do you think Solihull Moors can transform their season again like they did last year?"
Yeah, Solihull were really unlucky actually to lose out in the end last season in the playoffs. They're doing pretty well, aren't they, Solihull? I think there's no reason why. You quite often see clubs that go into sort of the second half of the season and that bit of quality and that bit of sort of non-league experience, shows through. I think they've had a pretty miserable December, haven't they, Solihull? But there's no reason why. They're possibly a little bit short of goal scorers and little bit leaky as well, actually. So,
Yeah.
but from what I've seen of them, they're not that far off. They're not that far off. There's no reason, I don't think. Neil Ardley knows what he's doing. He's good management at that level. I think there's no reason you can't see Solihull Moors getting in the playoffs and again having a big push for promotion.
A Scunthorpe fan came and said, do you have any information on the Scunthorpe United takeover? I'm expecting you probably don't have too much at the moment because, you know, it's
no, I'm honest. To be honest, following that one like everyone else is, and wondering what's going on at Scunthorpe and what's happening in the club. I've not got any inside knowledge beyond what's kind of been put out there. To be honest, what's happening in Scunthorpe.
We've had a final one then. How did you firstly get into non-league in the first place?
I'm watching games, to be honest, as a fan. So growing up in Buckinghamshire in the 90s, we didn't have a football league club. You know, MK Dons didn't exist then. Wickham were a non-league side. There wasn't a local football league team to support, so I supported Aylesbury United. It was my local town club. At that point, they were in the second tier of non-league. But very briefly, they were in the old conference. Had a good FA Cup run. Any non-league teams we've ever hosted England. You know, there's lots of reasons to support them, so I supported them. Watched them back in the club's, I guess, sort of heyday, getting maybe 1,000 for home games and you know, beating at the right end of non-league. The clubs had difficult fortunes, groundless at the moment, playing in Step 4 in the relegation battle in Step 4 at the moment. But yeah, that got me into non-league and honestly watching them going home games, some away games, watching them go to other grounds, and kind of got hooked into following the fortunes of other local sides and going to away games and ground hopping, seeing other grounds, and I just love that. I love kind of how raw and unpolished football is at that level. You know, there's still no VAR. You know, there's still that kind of surprise when you look at a team sheet of a non-league club on a Saturday afternoon. Partly, what players are missing because they're on a stag do, or they've got to work on a Tuesday night, so they're not there. Mixed in with 3 signings that may have happened during the week that the club hasn't announced or told you about. You still get that in non-league. I love that aspect of it. I love the fact that you've got the chairman in the stands that you can ask him what's happened to a player who's mysteriously disappeared off the radar, and he'll say that it was sold 4 weeks ago. You didn't know. I love that kind of friendly nature of it, and how accountable managers and players are. You can chat to them. You can have a normal relationship, a conversation with people at the club.
Yeah, it's quality. It's why I love non-league, because you can talk to, like you said, the managers, the chairman. You understand what's going on at the club most of the time, I must say. But yeah, that's what I think I love so much about non-league. But that concludes of all the questions and concludes of the podcast. Ollie, I really appreciate you taking the time out to come on and speak to me today.
No, my pleasure. Thank you very much for asking me again, and yeah, hope everyone has a lovely new year.
Likewise to you. Hopefully you have a good year as well. Cheers, Ollie.
Nice one.